everyone, TCG here, and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be a little bit of a different video, and it's a little more controversial, so I would like to give a little disclaimer before we start diving into the content here. And please remember that these are my own this is my own opinion, and these are my own predictions. So please be respectful and mindful of this if you don't agree with me, or if you have criticism about my points. So yeah, just wanted to put that out there before we start. I'm open to criticism, and I'm open to feedback, but please keep in mind and be respectful that this is all purely speculation. So if you have something that you would like to say, just please keep that in mind. Alright, thanks. On to the video. Alright, so Lugia V Star is coming in Silver Tempest, and everyone's super excited about it, and it's been winning tournaments in Japan, and it looks so great. Lugia looks like it's going to be one of those really good meta-defining hype decks. But the only problem with Lugia is that we've seen hype decks like this before, and they haven't worked out at all, or people realize a little too late after they've kind of worked with it a little bit, they realize, oh no, this isn't a good card anymore, or this isn't as good as I thought it was going to be. Now, Lugia V Star seems to rely mostly on getting set up with your Lugia V Star and getting your Archeops in the discard pile. Lugia V Star has the Tempest Dive attack for 220 damage, and allows you to discard a stadium in play, which is really good against counter decks or something that might use negative effect stadium. Lugia can be a really good hard-hitting deck with a 220 with Tempest Dive. You can add powerful colorless energy to be able to increase the damage. There's so much you can do with Lugia, and I definitely agree that is one of the best V-Stars we've ever had. But at the same time, it is also a very risky deck, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. So, its V-Star power is Summoning Star, which allows you to search your deck, or you may put up to 2 colorless Pokemon that don't have a rule box in your discard pile onto your bench. So, you can put 2 Archeops from Silver Tempest on your bench, and then you can start accelerating energy really quickly. But the problem with this is that it's a very fragile setup here. You have to be able to get Lugia V on the first turn. You have to be able to evolve into Lugia V Star on the second turn, and you have to have 2 Archeops in the discard pile in order to be able to use the V Star power, while also being able to use the V Star power in the first place. So if Lugia doesn't get any of that criteria, if they don't have any of that set up, then the deck crumbles apart. And there definitely could be ways around it. There could be some really creative ideas on how to get around this, but what I'm seeing from Japan right now is that is what they're relying on, and that is exactly the problems that they're facing. Lugia V Star, in my opinion, looks like it's going to be another one of those Rayquaza VMAX situations. If you guys remember Rayquaza VMAX, it was the hype deck of Evolving Skies. Everyone thought it was going to be so good because it could do so much damage, and because it had a great ability. But when it actually came out, people realized it wasn't actually as good as people thought it was going to be. And it took a little bit for it to sink in, and then people were like, oh, yeah, Rayquaza's not that good. Sylveon's better, the Urshifus are great, and they kind of just moved on. And another example is Charizard V Star. Everyone thought that with Magma Basin and the Return of Fire in Brilliant Stars, and with Arceus V Star, people thought that Charizard was going to come back and was going to really be a hard hitter in the new meta. And then it didn't really happen as much as people wanted it to. We had stuff like Arceus Charizard for sure. We had Arceus Charizard in a few regionals and stuff like that, but it was mainly Arceus Charizard V Max instead of V Star, so that caught a lot of people off guard. And if you look now at Charizard V Star's price, it actually just dropped a whole bunch. It's still an expensive-ish sort of card, even if it's not really good competitively, just because it's a Charizard. But what I'm trying to say here is that we've had hype decks like Lugia before, and they haven't worked at all. So just keeping that in mind, not saying that it's bad right now, or it's guaranteed to turn into one of those situations, but just keeping in mind that Lugia could be another one of those decks. This is definitely just something to keep in the back of your head as we continue on through this video here. So, my next point here is that we already have a somewhat established electric type counter meta. With Astral Radiance came Origin Form Palkia V Star, and that is weak to electric types. Now, we don't have the best electric types in the format. We do have stuff like Flying Pikachu, we have that single prize Aurora from Vivid Voltage, we have Regieleki and Regis, and then we have Vikavolt V with that actually gets a boost with Regieleki VMAX, and they were added over time with like Palkia. We had all these electric counters all of a sudden just started popping up everywhere because Palkia was the main deck that everyone was kind of fearing. And then we had stuff like Jolteon to like lock up your opponent, make sure that they couldn't use the Inteleon engine. There's definitely so many things that you can use against Palkia that nowadays you don't see as much because Palkia doesn't have as big of a meta share, but I feel like Lugia really could struggle against sort of counter stuff, and this isn't the first time, like, Palkia isn't the first deck to see extensive counters. We've had, when we had Arceus V Star and Brilliant Stars, we had a whole bunch of fighting types. Like, fighting types were all the rage all of a sudden. We had Rapid Strike Urshifu coming back, and we had Galarian Zapdos V. We also had Hisuian Decidueye eventually became a really big thing, and then it became part of Arc Flying Pika that won the World Championships a few months ago. So Arceus was heavily countered, and then before that we had Mew that was heavily countered too, with Dark types, and the Moltres game, they came, and we had the Dark Box counter deck that just was really good. And nowadays Mew has Drapion to deal with, but there's not really extensive Dark types in the deck. As time goes on, more cards enter the format, and previous decks become a little less relevant, but they still have counters, and they do exist in the format. But when Lugia comes out, and because everyone's hyping about Lugia, everyone's going to go ahead and immediately figure out as many ways as possible to counter Lugia. So I'm going to go touch up on a couple Lugia counters here. In fact, there's quite a few, but Lugia is incredibly powerful. Let me just say that I don't discredit it for looking like really weak. It's going to be targeted, and sure, you could argue that any deck beforehand has been targeted, but it's how they deal with the targets and how they react and respond to these targets and these specific counters is like what's really going to define the deck. Now, the first one I want to go over is Duraludon VMAX. My friend HGS7 would definitely, he would kill me if I didn't include Duraludon VMAX, but Duraludon VMAX has not really been a super... it's a really underrated card right now, and there have been a couple honorable mentions for Duraludon. It's been getting like top 8s and stuff like that, but Duraludon hasn't exactly gotten what I feel it deserves because it is such a it's just a really good card, and you can see it in like Arceus Duraludon or Lost Zone Duraludon. But people are focusing more on other decks, so Duraludon hasn't really had its chance to kind of shine ever since the Mew VMAX Renaissance. And then, like, you'd think that Duraludon would be played a lot because we have so much special energy, but now we have stuff like Lost Box, and we have stuff like Giratina, so, I mean, there's definitely, it could go both ways. But Duraludon absolutely destroys Lugia. Because Lugia plays literally all special energies in 90% of the decks I've looked at, it literally just walls off Lugia. And if Lugia wants to place down a Path to the Peak, then it's going to have its own complications, and we'll get back to that in a little bit here. But if it wants to play Cancel and Clone, you have to take up a deck spot for that. You have to find room for that, and I'm pretty sure Lugia has a pretty set in stone what it needs to look like in order for it to be effective. So Duraludon just walls off Lugia and can get set up really quickly, and Lugia has to be able to work around Duraludon instead of just being able to do the hit hard, hit fast sort of aspect of the deck that makes it so hyped right now. But I definitely think that like early game is critical, and we'll get back to that again later. Is that like the early game is going to define your if you're winning or you're losing with Lugia. So my next counter card I would want to say is Beedrill from Chilling Reign. When Arceus came out in Brilliant Stars, we had all these people all of a sudden playing Beedrill in their decks, and I'm pretty sure Andrew Mahone from Tricky Jim really popularized playing Beedrill in your deck, and it insta KOs special energy. So just imagine you're just playing a normal game of Pokemon with your Lugia deck, and all of a sudden your opponent pulls out a Single Strike Mustard, and they slap down a Beedrill, and then they attach an energy to it. It's like, well, there goes all my setup there. Lugia is going to be gone to the single prizer without them really having to do much. Now, that's a little bit of an understatement, because you have to set up Mustard, you have to play Grass Energy in your deck, or Aurora Energy, which is not exactly, like, it's not exactly optimal, but it is definitely something that you might see in, like, Regidrago V Star. You also have stuff like Appleton from Evolving Skies that, like, just goes ahead and wrecks Lugia because it does a whole bunch of damage. There are so many things about Lugia, like just so many flaws, I feel, that Lugia can have to where it can be very targeted and can just kind of fall off like a... not exactly how Rayquaza and Charizard did, because they didn't really have that set-in-stone sort of like counters to them, because Rayquaza doesn't have a weakness, and Charizard, there were no good, like, really good water types at the time. But I feel like the weakness game is really going to mess this up, and the fact that it plays special energy is also going to mess it up. And this leads me into my next point about Temple of Sinnoh and Dusknoir. Now, Dusknoir is not exactly really good to play. You have to play at least 3 cards in order for it to work. You have to play Arcphone, or Peonia, you have to play Dusknoir, and you have to play... you have to play Arcphone, Dream Ball, or Peonia, or, you have to play Arcphone, Peonia, or Dream Ball, and Dusknoir itself. And you have to be able to get the Dusknoir in play. And if you do, then great, you're set up for the game. And Lugia has to work around Dusknoir, and it has to naturally attach all its energy, and it has to do less damage, and that sort of stuff. So, like, Dusknoir is fine, but it's really Temple of Sinnoh is where it kind of comes in as a really good card. Temple of Sinnoh was introduced in Astral Radiance, and it hasn't really seen much play. It's mainly been just, like, anti-Regis, but Temple of Sinnoh has so much potential and opportunities with it, with Lugia, and I'm pretty sure people are going to start picking up on that, and they're going to play Temple of Sinnoh. And, like, Lugia has a counter around that. They have Tempest Dive, which allows them to discard a Stadium and play if they do choose to. And, like, yeah, you can discard Temple of Sinnoh, no problem, with once you have your Tempest Dive set up. But if you don't have your Tempest Dive set up, then you're stuck, or you're going to be doing way less damage, or you're going to be way less effective than if you didn't have it in there. Now, there's ways around it, counter Stadiums and Lost Vacuum and whatever, but I'm just saying that, it could really throw a wrench in that fragile setup for Lugia. Yeah, and then this leads me back to Path to the Peak, and it has the same situation. You can't use Summoning Star if there's a Path to the Peak in play. And if you want to play Path to the Peak for Regidrago V Star, I don't exactly... I believe Regidrago's V Star is not as good, but if you want to play against, like, Arceus Duraludon, or if you just want to play against Duraludon, you have to be able to counter that. Otherwise, you're stuck, and it doesn't allow you to be able to get the knockout. I definitely think that there's ways around that. I know that, like, Arceus plays Path after it Starbirths. Like, you Starbirth, and then you place down Path, and then you kind of just sit there. But Lugia, you need to be able to go use your Summoning Star, but because there's so much attention focusing on Lugia, then they could already have kind of like Lugia figured out. Lugia looks very set in stone right now from what the lists I've seen and the research I've done here, and it looks like it's almost the same archetype with varying lists, but it looks very similar. You have the core concept of Lugia, and I feel like that can be easily manipulated and taken to the point where it's not as relevant or good anymore because it's so targeted. And as time goes on, yeah, maybe it will get less attention, and maybe people will focus on a different hype deck or something. I know that there's still one more special set that we might get, that we're gonna get, and that might kind of add something to the meta, but who knows? All I'm saying is that Lugia is very targeted. All eyes are on Lugia. And with everybody kind of being like, oh, Lugia, that's so great, it's gonna be so good. I feel like Lugia getting the spotlight here is gonna allow other stuff like Regidrago or like Alolan Vulpix to be able to sneak in and just end up being better in the long run, because everyone's focusing on Lugia and focusing on how to counter Lugia. And the last thing I want to, about counters, is I want to mention that Evoltol from Celebrations exists. And I guess this is not exactly as good of a counter, but being able to discard special energy, right now in the Pokemon trading card game, there is not a whole lot that can retrieve your special energy very well. I believe you have like Silene, and that's about it. Is that you can just Silene and try and put energies back on, and then you can just Primal Turbo it back on. But that's your supporter for the turn. And if you keep consistently losing energy, eventually you're going to run out of energy. And even if you're not playing Evoltol and you just get knocked out, then you're going to just lose your energy anyways. So Lugia is a very shaky deck. And there might be an energy retrieval, special energy retrieval in Silver Tempest that I might not know about. But right now, as it looks, if you have your Lugia get knocked out, then you're in real trouble. It's like a one-hit wonder, and then you gotta pick up the pieces afterwards. And that's why so many Lugia decks are playing so much energy, but I feel like it still can be, like, not enough, I would say. Like, I know I'm kind of ranting about how Lugia doesn't seem that good, and look, it looks great. I think it looks so good, and it could be very broken, and I'll come back to that in a little bit, but as it stands right now, how I feel right now about it, it just doesn't seem like Lugia is the deck that everyone thinks it's going to be. It's not practical to have all these counters in a deck. I know, like, the Dusknoir combo does not seem very good, but, like, some decks it works, like Regidrago. We already kind of touched on that. You can play Duraludon, VMAX, and Mustard, and you can play Beedrill in Regidrago. I might touch up on that in a later video about having Beedrill Single Strike and Duraludon in my Regidrago deck, just specifically for that Lugia matchup, and as that Lugia counter. So again, not discrediting Lugia and its success so far, I just feel like it's not exactly what people should be all focusing on. And if they are going to focus on it, they should probably think about how are we going to build Lugia to the point where we can kind of work around these sorts of counters. So if you want to build Lugia, I'm not stopping you. In fact, I'm supporting, like, you build what you want, and I'm excited to see how you do. But this might just be like a heads up of, hey, these are some counters that you might experience on your road to getting Lugia all built and whatever. Yeah, it seems really. It seems either one or two ways. It's either you're all for Lugia, you're all in, you're putting all your chips in for Lugia, or you're like, okay, let's take a look at Lugia. It doesn't seem that good. And right now I'm kind of like in that kind of the middle-ish, where it looks great. Don't get me wrong, it looks amazing, and I'm excited to see how it does, but at the same time, I'm like, this is a really risky deck to play, and I think it could be kind of an overhyped deck, and it's being overrated right now. Next up, you might argue some people might argue that it has a 50% meta share in Japan, and 50% is a lot. If you think about it, if you were to draw a deck out of a hat, and half of it is Lugia, there is a 50% chance you're going to draw Lugia. So that means if you're in a Japanese tournament, there's a 50% chance you're going to encounter Lugia, which means that people are going to start playing stuff in their decks to be able to counter the 50% of the decks that are being played there. and it's very easy to be able to go in and just wipe out Lugia, because half of the meta is Lugia. Now, Japan has a very different metagame than us. They play a lot of different cards than us. They play a lot of different decks than us. And we kind of... Because Japan has... they have a very different... They have a different schedule than us. They get the cards first. So everyone's looking towards Japan. Everyone's looking at Japan and being like, oh my goodness, this deck is really good in Japan. Well, how's that going to translate over to when we get it in the United States, or the UK, or Australia, or anywhere else? How is that going to work? Because Japan has their own, like, little bubble, where they have their own metagame. They have kind of their own thing going on. In fact, they still had Team Up to, whatever set it was. I think it was Team Up to, a Fusion Strike or something like that, where they had all of these cards available to them, and then they finally got a rotation. It was, like, insane, and, like, made me think about, it made me think about, like, how different Japan is from us. So I really think that Lugia is, like, it does well in Japan, but how will that do here? How will that do anywhere else? So, just something to keep in mind. I don't think it's, and just sorry for coming back to it, but I don't think Japan really is a definitive meta prediction. And it's all coming down to speculation. Since everyone's like, oh, this looks great, this looks good, this could be the next great deck, you're speculating. This is speculation. And this video is speculation. Like, I'm not, it's all speculation, I guess. The whole thing here, every time that we get a new set, and we see a really good card, we speculate about it. We think about how it's going to be so good, or how is it going to be so bad. And it goes one of two ways, as I kind of mentioned earlier. But Japan has its own situation, so you can definitely take my opinion about Japan and how it's so much different. You can take that with a grain of salt. If you really feel like Japan is going to have the most accurate metagame predictions, then by all means, I don't mind, and I don't have a problem against it. I'm just saying that Japan, in my eyes, Japan is very different from us, and that we should at least consider that before we say Lugia is going to be the next best deck, or X deck is going to be the next BDIF, because even though it's good in Japan, it might not be good everywhere else. Okay, I'll move on from that. And finally, I would just like to say that, again, I could be very wrong about Lugia, and I'm okay with that. If Lugia comes out and it's a great deck, then, oh well, this video aged very poorly. If you're watching this from the future and Lugia turned out to be a really great deck, then, oh well, Pika was wrong. And I'm okay with that. I'm just using evidence from previous previous metas when we had Fusion Strike with countered with Mew, and Brilliant Stars counter Arceus. And we've had the metas, and then we've had the counter metas, which is like we've had these sets, like these really good decks, and then we've had these counter decks, or these counter cards that make a counter meta, is what I'd like to call it. So I definitely think that Silver Tempest has a really good opportunity here. Do I think it's going to be as meta-changing as Lost Origin or as Brilliant Stars? No. I don't think that Silver Tempest exactly is going to shake up the game a whole bunch, but who knows? It could be a really good set to be able to use cards that you don't normally use in other senses, and bring them back to life. And I'm really excited to see how Silver Tempest pans out, which it comes out in November, so I'm excited and ready for it. But those are my thoughts about Lugia V Star. Again, if you have criticism about Lugia and my thoughts about Lugia, then by all means, make sure to leave a comment. Just please be respectful. I am a human being too. I read each and every one of your comments, and I take time to make sure that each of you at least gets attention for coming and watching my video. And I want to thank everybody for watching my videos and for subscribing so far, and everyone who's given me support. If you haven't subscribed already to the channel, please consider it. I'm trying to get to 300 subscribers by the end of the year. But yeah, that's really my thoughts about Lugia V Star. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, God bless and have fun. We'll see how Lugia does, and I'll see you when Silver Tempest starts. Or maybe I'll see you next time. We'll see. Thanks for watching.